Chapter 3 Christian Evolutionism. Editor's note. This chapter has been culled from three sources. 1. A transcription of a lecture that Father Seraphim gave during his Orthodox Survival course in 1975, a continuation of the lecture contained in the preceding chapter. 2. Father Seraphim's own writings for an unfinished chapter he was working on with A.Y., a public school teacher. And 3. Father Seraphim's miscellaneous notes on Teilhard de Chardin. The resulting composite provides a remarkably extensive treatment of Christian evolutionism, especially of Teilhard, whom Father Seraphim called the great evolutionist prophet of our times. 1. Introduction. There are forms of evolutionary philosophy, most notably the Marxist, which loudly proclaim themselves to be an all-sufficient philosophy of life, replacing the disproved philosophy of Christianity. Footnote: Karl Marx was a devout Darwinist who in Das Kapital called Darwin's theory epoch-making. He believed his reductionist materialistic theories of the evolution of social organization to be deducible from Darwin's discoveries, and thus proposed to dedicate his Das Kapital to Darwin. The funeral oration of a Marxist body, delivered by Engels, stressed the evolutionary basis of communism. Just as Darwin discovered the law of evolution in organic nature, so Marx discovered the law of evolution in human history. End of footnote. The arguments of these atheist evolutionists are naive in the extreme and full of self-contradictions, and there is no need to concern ourselves with them. Even many contemporary atheists outside the Soviet orbit realize that belief in God can neither be proved or disproved, but is arrived at or rejected by means of a kind of evidence quite different from scientific proof. However, there is nothing in the evolutionary view of the world in itself which requires it to be atheistic, and in fact the evolutionary theory makes much more sense to normal human reason if one has faith in at least some kind of God who puts the process in motion, guides it, etc. The philosophy of the world as a chance play of atoms, which themselves came into existence by chance, is satisfying only to the most limited and stunted minds. The outlook of the Orthodox Christian toward evolution, therefore, is by no means the simple one of the rejection of a philosophy which is openly anti-religious or anti-Christian. The more sophisticated evolutionists are all religious to some degree, and there are many Christian evolutionists, some of them even having the reputation of being Orthodox theologians. Here we shall examine the views of some of these Christian evolutionists, all of them either claiming to be Orthodox Christians or at least having their evolutionary views recommended by Orthodox Christians. In this way, we shall be able to see the evolutionary philosophy at its best reconciled with Orthodox theology, as it were. And so, we shall be able to begin to see whether the philosophy of evolution is really compatible with Orthodox Christianity. Here we shall not subject the views of these Christian evolutionists to detailed criticism, but will rather look to see what questions these views raise for Orthodox faith. These questions will then be examined in detail in our final section on the Orthodox patristic view of creation. In the last few years, there have been articles, small articles and some longer ones, in the Orthodox press on this very question of evolution. The official Greek Archdiocese newspaper, the Orthodox Observer, printed several articles which are quite surprising in that they are so far away from orthodoxy. One of these, Evolution a Heresy, quotes the well-known Orthodox theologian Panagiotis Trempelas. It appears more glorious and divine-like and more in harmony with the regular methods of God, which we daily see expressed in nature, to have created the various forms by evolutionary methods, himself remaining the first and supreme creative cause of the secondary and immediate causes to which are owed the development of the variety of species. This is the view of all Christian evolutionists, and it raises the extremely important question of whether it is possible to attain knowledge of God's creation by means of the regular methods of God which we daily see expressed in nature. This is by no means as simple a question as it might appear. And another, no less important question is raised by this view. What is it then that God created in the beginning? For evolution, by definition, is a process in time and must have a beginning. Did he create only the cosmic blob to which atheist philosophers reduce the origin of the evolutionary process? Or must we be totally agnostic about this beginning, as many atheist philosophers tell us we must be? The article concludes, as long as Christians recognize the creative power of God in the process of evolution, it is both bold and hasty to call evolution a heresy. This conclusion reveals rather clearly the simple-minded approach to the whole question of the philosophy of evolution which prevails in Christian evolutionists who have not given serious and critical thought to the real problems which this philosophy presents for orthodox faith. The whole point of this article, which seems to present the viewpoint of many of the Orthodox clergy in America, that is, those who have been raised in an evolutionary atmosphere without giving much thought to it, is this. If God is added to the theory of evolution, it becomes acceptable to Orthodox Christians. We are only against evolution if it is atheistic. But this is surely a very naive answer to a rather complicated question. What of the philosophy of evolution itself? Is it compatible with Orthodox Christian theology and philosophy, even with God added to it? All of the great heretics of history have also believed in God. Indeed, the demons also believe and tremble. James chapter 2, verse 19. More rigorous thinking than this is required before an Orthodox Christian can know what to think of evolution. The article in the Greek Archdiocese newspaper says that evolution cannot really be a heresy because there are many Christians who believe in it. Besides Trempelas, it quotes two other Christian evolutionists, Lecomte du Nouy and Teilhard de Chardin. Let us look for a moment at Lecomte du Nouy and his views. 2. Lecomte du Nouy. Pierre Lecomte du Nouy was born in Paris in 1883 and died in New York in 1947. A widely known and respected scientist, mathematician, and physiologist, he wrote several books on scientific philosophy. His popular book, Human Destiny, sets forth his conclusions about evolution. It turns out he was not much of a Christian, for he believed that man created his own God, who is actually a formidable fiction. He was very patronizing towards Christianity. He believed that Christianity has been misunderstood and misinterpreted, but it is still good for the masses and is a useful tool for man's continuing evolution on a moral and ethical plane. It has no objective absolute truth. Christ is not God, but His perfect man. Christian tradition, however, somehow helps to educate the race towards further evolution. He says, "We are at the beginning of the transformations which will end in the superior race. Evolution continues in our time no longer on the physiological or anatomical plane, but on the spiritual and moral plane. We are at the dawn of a new phase of evolution. It is difficult enough to find scientific evidence for physical evolution, but it is impossible to find evidence for spiritual evolution. Nevertheless, he believes in it. He says, "Our conclusions are identical with those expressed in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, provided that this chapter is interpreted in a new way and considered as the highly symbolical expression of a truth which was intuitively perceived by its redactor or by the sages who communicated it to him." Of course, the book of Genesis was not written through mere human intuition. On the contrary, the Holy Fathers say that Moses heard from God the truths contained in it. St. John Chrysostom says the book of Genesis is a prophecy of the past, that is, Moses saw an exalted vision of what the world was in the beginning. Saint Isaac the Syrian describes how such a vision can take place, how the soul of a holy man can ascend to a vision of the beginning of things. Describing how such a soul is enraptured at the thought of the future age of incorruption, Saint Isaac writes, "And from this one is already exalted in his mind to that which preceded the composition or making of the world, when there was no creature, nor heaven, nor earth, nor angels, nothing of that which was brought into being, and to how God, solely by his good will, suddenly brought everything from non-being into being, and everything stood before him in perfection." Monsieur Lecomte du Nouy continues, "Let us try to analyze the sacred text as though it were a highly symbolical and cryptic description of scientific truths. This, of course, is extremely patronizing, as if poor Moses tried his best to get a scientific picture of the way things were, and all he came up with were these images." Lecomte du Nouy explains, "The omnipotence of God is manifested by the fact that man, descended from the marine worms, is today capable of conceiving the future existence of a superior being and of wanting to be his ancestor. Christ brings us the proof that this is not an unrealizable dream, but an accessible ideal. That is, Christ is some kind of Superman, and this is the ideal to which man is now evolving. Lecomte du Nouy gives us a new criterion of good and evil, which he says is absolute with respect to man. Good is that which contributes to the course of ascending evolution. Evil is that which opposes evolution. The respect of human personality is based on the recognition of man's dignity as a worker for evolution, as a collaborator with God. The only goal of man should be the attainment of human dignity with all its implications." He goes on to say that there are thinking men in all religions, and therefore all religions have a unique inspiration, a spiritual kinship, an original identity. He says, "The unity of religions must be sought in that which is divine, namely universal in man. No matter what our religion, we are all like people at the bottom of a valley who seek to climb a snowy peak that dominates the others. We all have our eyes fixed on the same goal. Unfortunately, we differ on what road to take. One day, provided they never stop ascending, they must all meet at the top of the mountain. The road to it matters little." Of course, the top of the mountain is not the salvation of the soul. It is not the kingdom of heaven, but is precisely the chiliastic New Age. It may be seen with little difficulty that Lecomte du Nouy's views are not at all orthodox or even vaguely Christian but deistic. It is useful for us to know these views, however, because behind the surface of a religious relativism which no Orthodox Christian can accept, du Nouy's evolutionary views are by no means untypical of contemporary Christian evolutionists, including many Orthodox Christians, and they raise philosophical and religious questions which any thinking Orthodox Christian must be prepared to answer. Let us mention here two groups of these questions. 1. As a corollary to the universality of evolution, which all evolutionists accept, everything in the world evolves, nothing is excepted from this natural process, he sees in the future of human evolution the coming of a superman or superior race. Also, he speaks of the future of human evolution as on the moral and spiritual plane. Can an Orthodox Christian believe in such things? If not, what a reason does he have to exempt man from the otherwise universal natural process? 2. The book of Genesis, he believes, must be interpreted in a new way, symbolically. Specifically, the transgression of Adam was not a historical event, but simply the symbol of the dawn of human consciousness. Can an Orthodox Christian believe this? How does Orthodox Christianity understand the book of Genesis?